Nice to see nice to see a lot of familiar faces. Just a reminder that this coffee chat is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. So welcome everyone. My name is Rashma Agarwal. I am the Director of Government Relations for Economic Alliance, Snohomish County. I'm also just going to remind everyone, if you don't mind putting yourself on mute.
So much in the last like 5 or 6 years. Like
Rashma, you're muted.
Sorry. Let me try that again. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to EASC's Coffee Chat on Legislative Wrap-Up Issues. I'm Rashma Agarwal. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at the Economic Alliance of Snohomish County. And today we're going to be talking about outcomes and the end of session in Olympia. I hope everyone has their cup of coffee. I usually like to start my mornings by thinking about something that I'm grateful for. This week, it's all about Teacher Appreciation Week in our family. So I'm grateful for all the teachers who've touched our lives and our family's life. Just wanted to share that on a personal note. So as we get started, before I introduce our speakers, I just want to welcome everyone and acknowledge our sponsor for today's coffee chat. Now, we should have some slides popping up on the screen here in a minute. We had some internet issues in the office, so please bear with us this morning. And here we go. So for this morning's coffee chat, as we talk about legislative issues, Desimone Consulting Group is a public affairs and government relations firm based here in Seattle and with offices in Washington, D.C. Every member of this consulting group is familiar with the Pacific Northwest and has deep relationships here. We are actually using them for our DC fly-in trip, which is next week, where we'll be advocating collectively for our business interests and for Snohomish County in Washington, DC. So next, please, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers for today. So first of all, we have Shelly Pundhelder, Senior Government Affairs Consultant and EASC's Contract Lobbyist with Thomas Honeywell, Gordon Thomas Honeywell. So Shelly, welcome. And I think many of you heard from her earlier during our mid-session coffee chat as well. Now we have Mike Steele, who is going to be joining us, Representative Mike Steele, but I believe he's just running a few minutes late. So when he joins us, we'll kind of pop him on here to make.
Good morning, I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay, welcome, Representative Steele. Oh, okay, sorry. We're really thankful for you to be here. Thank you for taking the time to join our community this morning. So with that, I am going to kick it over to you, Shelly, to make your presentation and introduce yourself a little bit to our community, just in case for the folks who have not previously had a chance to meet you.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see many of you again, many familiar faces, and thank you, Rep. Steele, for joining us this morning. As Rashma said, I have the pleasure of being the Economic Alliance Snohomish County Contract Lobbyist. And so this past legislative session, I had the privilege of working to support and advance many of the Alliance's legislative priorities. So this morning, I'm going to do a really quick overview of what happened during the 2023 session. It's going to be review for many of you, and I'm going to highlight the outcomes of the priorities that the Alliance had. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rep. Steele to correct on anything that I may have missed and kind of fill in the color of the lines that I draw. So let's see, I'm going to try to share my screen. Actually, the screen is already up. You know, Rachel, I'm just going to have you advance the screen, the slides, so I won't have to deal with that. So if we want to go to, I'll let her pull it up, as that's kind of an audible on my part. So thank you, Rachel, for being flexible. So this was the 2023 legislative session. It was the first year of the biennium. The legislative cycle is 2 years, one long year, which is 105 consecutive days, and then 60 days. The first year of the session, the primary objective is to adopt the biennial budgets. Washington has 3 budgets. They have the operating, capital, and transportation budgets. And the operating budget funds most state agency operations, so it's appropriately named. And the 23-25 budget, which the state's fiscal year begins on July 1, so the new budget will take effect July 1 of this year. It's a $69.8 billion budget. The capital budget funds brick and mortar construction. And it makes $9 billion worth of investments over the next 2 years. Of that $9 billion, there's $400 million that is dedicated to the Housing Trust Fund. And even more than that is dedicated towards other housing projects and programs. And I'm just going to pause real quick to see, Rachel, it's not showing up on my end, but is there something I should be doing? There we go. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think there was a question in the chat. Yes, we can definitely share out a copy of the presentation. If you have questions that come up as I go along, feel free to pop them in the chat. If I see them, I'll try to answer them. And if not, we'll definitely get to them. It's meant to be interactive. So hopefully it's not too much of a monologue. So the third budget is the transportation budget. It funds, just like it says, the state's transportation system, and it also funds the operations and then the capital construction side. And it's a $13.5 billion budget. In addition to the budgets, the legislature introduced just over 2,200 bills and passed 482 bills. Remains to be seen how many of those will be signed into law versus vetoed. So far, the governor has only vetoed 1 bill, but he has until May 16th to complete that work. The one item that was not completed this session was adopting a law regarding possession of controlled substances. The state's current law is set to expire on June 30th. And so the governor has called for a special session to begin May 16th. For the legislature to address that issue. This is commonly referred to as the Blake fix or the Blake bill. That Blake is a reference to the Supreme Court case from 2021, which prompted a revisit to this statute. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Moving on to the next slide, EASC had 4 priorities this session. You can see them on the screen. I'm going to, as I mentioned, briefly review some of the highlights of the policies that were considered and then the investments that were made in each of these categories. So next slide. The first category was competitive business climate. The legislature made several changes to the law to support a competitive business climate. They adopted a preferential tax rate for the manufacturing and wholesaling of alternative jet fuel. They passed a law improving the local government permitting process and expanded a sales tax exemption for the construction of new facilities for aircraft maintenance repair operators. And this last one is significant for EASC since the tax exemption previously only applied to maintenance repair operators at SeaTac Airport, but now it will apply both to MROs at Spokane Airport and Payne Field. So making sure that we're remaining competitive with the other airports in the state. When it comes to competitive business climate, as most of you know, often the best thing the legislature can do is not pass new laws. And there were several bills that were introduced that would have been damaging to business, and those did not advance. And you can see some of the most prominent ones listed on the screen. In addition to the policies, the legislature made several investments to support business and business development. They allocated $8.6 million for associate development organizations statewide. So ADOs, those are groups just like EASC that support businesses around the state. Although there was a request to have that amount increased, it unfortunately was not increased, but it was not decreased. So we're still considering that a win that that funding level was maintained. There was also $6.5 million allocated to a research and development center for sustainable aviation fuel at Payne Field. And this is envisioned to be the only facility in the world to collect, sample, and distribute sustainable aviation fuels at the scale that's needed for widespread use in planes. So really keeping not just Washington State, but Snohomish County kind of at the forefront of aerospace. Moving on to infrastructure, one of the bills that was considered, House Bill 1791, creates the Commercial Aviation Work Group, which will provide recommendations to the legislature on options for a new location of a new commercial airport. And that's to help address the increasing demand for passenger and air cargo in our state, particularly in Western Washington. A bill that did not pass but received really significant consideration, and I am confident will return next session, is Senate Bill 5466 regarding transit-oriented development. This bill would have increased the zoned capacity around transit stations, which is generally agreed to as a objective that everyone would like to see. It ultimately died because there wasn't enough time to work through a lot of the details in what that looks like on the ground. So I'm confident that there'll be work on that over the next several months, and that will likely see something in this short session. I think the biggest thing the legislature did for infrastructure was to pass the transportation budget. As I mentioned, the budget is for the next 2 years, but it also provided guidance for anticipated funding over the next 6 years. So for the most part, that schedule honors the previous funding commitments that the legislature made in the 2015 Connecting Washington package. And of the 12 Snohomish County regional priority projects that were funded through Connecting Washington, 10 are kept to their original timeline, and 2 are pushed out 2 years. For the Snohomish County regional projects that were funded through the Move Ahead package that was passed last year, many of those projects received their requested phasing of funds. So it really is a significant outcome and significant improvement over the proposed budget that the governor released last year. That was concerning because it pushed out many Snohomish County projects several biennia. The third priority is thriving communities. And I think perhaps one of the most noteworthy bills from this past session was the middle housing bill, which authorizes middle housing types, which are accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, those types of homes, something other than a single family detached unit. It authorizes those on single family lots throughout the greater Puget Sound and in other urban parts of the state. There are limitations on the specific number of units based on what the city size is and where the city is located. But the bill represents a substantial increase in zoned capacity for new housing construction. The legislature also passed 2 bills on condominium liability reform that will, the goal is to increase condo construction. Passed a bill that makes some progress on clarification of when police officers can engage in the vehicle pursuit. And as I mentioned, probably the biggest concern that did not get over the finish line was the Blake Fix bill. The governors called for a special session on May 16th, and special sessions last 30 consecutive days. And so the legislature will have 30 days to reach agreement and hopefully get something over the finish line. If they are not able to reach agreement in that 30 days, then there's an opportunity to call another special session. Every special session is 30 days and the governor is the one that initiates those. In addition to all the policies that were passed to support thriving communities, the budget makes substantial investments, both statewide and in Snohomish County. And I'll just pause really quickly so folks can read those investments as they're listed on the next slide. I'll let Rachel advance it before we move on to discussing the final priority. Okay, next slide. The final priority is workforce and talent, which was conveniently also a main focus for the legislature this session. They passed several bills that we supported. Most of them make seemingly small changes, but will have a big effect over time when it comes to building up the workforce. There were 4 different occupational compacts that passed the legislature. Most notably, the Nurse Licensure Compact, which will allow nurses who are licensed in other compact participating states to work in Washington. And I think everyone knows it's common knowledge that there is a nursing shortage. And so this nursing compact is one of several bills that passed aiming to address the nurse workforce shortage. The budget, so next slide. The budget also invests heavily in workforce development, and I'll name just a few. The first is $2 million for the continuation of the Regional Apprenticeship Pathways Program. This is a program that is operated through Marysville School District in coordination with several other organizations, and it's become a model for other regions of the state. There was a bill that was passed this year, House Bill 1013, that essentially establishes this framework for regional apprenticeship programs statewide. And Snohomish County is the leader in that. So there was funding for the county to continue that work. And there's $14.5 million for career connected learning grants and $42.1 million to add capacity for early learning facilities, recognizing that a shortage of childcare is a major barrier to some people being in the workforce. So that was a lot of information, and I apologize, I wasn't keeping an eye on the chat if any questions came through, but I'm going to turn it back over to Rashma, and we can hear from the main event, Representative Steele.
Thank you, Shelly, for that very comprehensive update. And we're happy to dive deeper into those issues. If people have questions, please pop them into the chat. Representative Steele, thank you for being here with us, and welcome to the EASC Coffee Chat community. Thank you for your service to the community as well as to Washington State, and for making it through session. And also, I just wanted to say before you kick off with your remarks, congratulations on being elected Deputy Minority Leader for the House by your colleagues. We're going to look forward to working with you next year. And I just wanted to suggest in your remarks, perhaps you could also just incorporate a little bit of the parts of Snohomish County that you've now incorporated into your new into your district as a result of the districting process, just for those in our community who may not be familiar with this change. So over to you.
Well, good morning, Rashman. Thank you. Thank you, Shelly, for the great update. Yes, as was said, Mike Steele, I currently represent the 12th legislative district, and as Rashma alluded to, it's a little bit new to me. I formerly represented all of Douglas County, all of Chelan County, part of Grant, and part of Okanagan. I now represent part of Snohomish, part of King, all of Chelan County, and just a small variation of Douglas County in East Wenatchee. So the parts of Snohomish County that I represent actually go all the way across Highway 2 to Monroe and have the whole city of Monroe. So I go from Leavenworth all the way across Highway 2 to Monroe. So spent a lot of time driving back and forth over Highway 2 over the last several months, and meeting folks and getting familiar with parts of the district that I had not formally represented. But luckily, as a lifelong Washingtonian, born and raised in Lake Chelan, I'm very familiar with Highway 2 and have spent my life driving back and forth to the west side that way. So wasn't much of a learning curve, but appreciate all the folks that took time to introduce themselves and talk about the issues that are most important to Snohomish County. And as Shelly mentioned, it was a very interesting session. She did a great job of wrapping up the highlights. But, this was the first time that we have been back in person in 2 years. So it was very interesting to get our feet back under us as we were getting used to the long nights of floor debates and the long hours in committees. I currently serve as the ranking member of the capital budget. So Shelly mentioned, the investments that we did make across Washington. I'm very proud of that budget. That is a truly bipartisan budget. It passed unanimously off the House floor and unanimously off the Senate floor. And that takes a lot of time by 4 budget writers to invest in and to make sure that we're building consensus all the way along and that we're investing in communities all across Washington, from our most urban to our most rural. And I'm very proud of the budget work that we did. And I think it will make economic development differences across all of Washington. I like to refer to it as the job creation budget from the state. And it's a way that we can put people to work. It's a way that we can invest in all communities of every size to make sure that folks are seeing opportunity in every corner of Washington. So I'm proud of that. I also serve on the education committee in the House, so the K-12 education committee. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of work done in terms of trying to evaluate learning loss after COVID, evaluating policies that would help students recapture some of that learning loss over the last several years. A very interesting committee. I've been on that committee the entire time I've served in the legislature, 4 terms, and I continue to appreciate the work that's done in a bipartisan way on that committee. I also serve on the Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that writes the general fund budget. It's the largest committee in the legislature, and we spend a lot of long hours together listening to almost every bill that passes through the legislature. So as Shelly mentioned, 2,200 bills, it's a lot of volume to work through. It's a lot of time and effort that we spend sometimes through the night to evaluate bills that come before that committee. And appreciate all of you who took time to testify in front of that committee and who helped us advance good policy and good finance opportunities through that committee. So it's just been interesting as we did wrap up the session. Shelly alluded to the Blake fix or the Blake decision. And as she mentioned, the governor did call a special session, which will begin on May 16th. It is unlikely that the legislature will return on May 16th. We are actively negotiating that bill. It will be the only bill that we take up when we do come back into session. And that's a really important one because as you can imagine, and you probably have seen in the media, mayors from across Washington, county commissioners, county councils from across Washington are begging the legislature to do something before the bill that we previously passed expires June 30th. And we believe we should do something because what we're seeing now, cities and counties adopting ordinances that would be different across Washington, or create a patchwork of policy as it relates to drug possession and paraphernalia. And for me, I really want to be able to point to something that can create standardized policy across Washington that doesn't force these smaller cities and counties to do the work that the legislature really should be doing. And I've said again and again that I don't believe this drug possession or drug paraphernalia possession to be a partisan issue. As I talk to people all across Washington, Democrats and Republicans, they want to see a fix to this. They want to make sure that their communities are safe, and they want to make sure that folks have the resources to get the help they need. That's fundamentally, for me, that's the bottom line. If we don't have something in place, then there's no way to get the folks into the diversion therapies, diversion programs that we want to lay out in this bill. I would also mention that we made investments of almost $211 million in the capital budget to create facilities and opportunities across Washington in every community to deal with substance use disorders and clinics around that. So deploying that is going to be really important, but also having policy that supports that deployment is going to be very important. And if we don't have that in place, it makes it very difficult for cities and counties to access the money we've laid out. So there's a lot left to be done around that decision. And it is my hope that we will see opportunity there, and we will come to agreement. Right after this meeting, I'll be meeting with the Four Corners and the Speaker of the House to try and see where we are on that particular policy, and see if we can advance something in time to get through the 30-day session, because we need to have something done before June, and we need to do it quickly. And none of us want to spend any extra time in Olympia than we absolutely have to. So it's our hope that we'll have an agreement and then go back for a day, vote on that agreement, and then call it the end of the special session. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions and just appreciate this group and the work they do. I think for folks who don't know, in my day job, I serve as the executive director of the Lake Chelan Chamber of Commerce. And so economic development in rural communities is super important to me. And it's something that I place a whole lot of value in. And the work that you're all doing truly does shape community and does shape opportunity. And I'm just very familiar with it. And so I feel like I'm at home in this group and would just welcome the opportunity to answer questions you might have and any observations you might want to make.
Okay, thank you, Representative Steele. We do have a couple of questions coming in. I was just going to say to the group, please feel free to pop more in there. We do have someone from the Boys and Girls Club who's just saying a quick thank you for the capital requests to help increase their capacity and affordable and accessible access to childcare, which, you know, has been a big issue at this session as a way to sort of get people back into the workforce. And then I will just sort of add maybe another comment that's in the chat that you might want to address from a participant highlighting the fact that Governor Inslee has put forward an aggressive cap and investment program to help fund climate change reduction. Can you speak a little bit more to the plans relating to that?
Absolutely. So the Climate Commitment Act is what is being referred to, and that's so the cap and investment program is a series of auctions that would sell carbon on the open market that would allow the state to capture some of that revenue. You'll find that the Climate Commitment Act money is sprinkled across all three budgets, so it is utilized in the operating, transportation, and capital budgets. And I would just say that we did indeed utilize that money throughout the capital budget. Most of the money, as it was outlined in policy, was for things around like the naturals, for instance. So reforestation, salmon barrier removal. We did work in HVAC systems and in conversion from gas to electric heat, that kind of thing. So yes, we did indeed utilize it. The only concern that I had with it as we were heading into the session, as we and the way we sort of approached it in writing the capital budget, at least, was we sort of set that money aside because we hadn't had the first auction, and the first auction took place in February. So we didn't really even have a sense of what that money would look like. So it wasn't really available for us, in my personal opinion, to spend until we had an idea of what those revenues look like. And so we waited until the close to the end of session before we actually had agreement on that Climate Commitment Act money and then utilized it throughout the budget. And I would just say the challenge with writing a budget that is dependent upon sort of an uncertain revenue source. So if you think about the way the mechanism for the Climate Commitment Act money works, it's an auction, right? So we hold these quarterly auctions, and those quarterly auctions determine what the revenue looks like. And so it's hard to have an uncertain revenue source when you're trying to write a certain budget with bonds that are guaranteed for 30 years. So that's the only concern that I have. I mean, it certainly gave us extra money in air quotes to utilize that we did not have before in the capital budget. So it did help with some of the burden in terms of trying to write a $9 billion budget. So, but it was indeed utilized, and those were some of my concerns.
Thank you, Rep. Steele. You touched on a couple of areas that you were very proud of, like the budget at session. Are there other specific issues that you want to elaborate on that you helped to advance? And maybe while we're waiting for some additional questions, is there a particular area that you were really disappointed in that you might want to share with the group?
Well, I'll just start by saying one of the bills that I was really proud of that I passed and was signed into law before the end of session was an additional set of counseling sessions that are now allowed for families of homicide victims. So families who had to face that trauma were allowed 12 sessions through LNI, counseling sessions through LNI, and my bill expanded those sessions based on input from mental and behavioral health specialists. They would be allowed an unlimited amount through LNI, and LNI was able to do that through existing funds. And I was very proud to pass that. And so victims of homicide, family victims of homicide were really instrumental in helping me get that bill passed. And I was very proud of that bill, and I'm happy to see it get over the line. One of the areas of concern obviously continues to be this Blake decision. We had 105 days that we were actively trying to solve this problem, and we waited until the final hours of sine die to bring a bill up that did not have enough votes in the majority caucus to pass. And I will tell you that is unprecedented. In 20 years, that has not happened. And so to sit on the House floor and to watch that whole process take place and to wait for the voting to close while the speaker held the machine open in hopes that she would garner enough votes to see it pass. That was very, very interesting. And I had not seen that before. And so when it did fail, it left us all a bit stunned and kind of concerned about how we move forward. And the Senate began to scramble almost immediately to try and write another bill that they could bring, suspend rules for and bring them directly to the floor. But we just ultimately ran out of time, and that was very, very interesting. And so I was very frustrated by that, again, since we had 105 days that we were actively discussing this policy and actively trying to move it through committee and solve the problem before having to come back to a special session. That was obviously the biggest area of frustration for both sides of the aisle. It wasn't again a partisan issue. It was something that we were all very frustrated with.
Thank you. We just have someone in the chat saying thank you for supporting the arts in our communities. Do you want to elaborate perhaps a little bit more on that?
Yeah, we were able to fully fund the community for the arts list that came through the capital budget. So in the final budget, we fully funded the list of projects from around Washington. And again, those were projects that were scattered across the state in urban and rural communities. And it was really nice to be able to find in the final budget fully fund that whole list that was proposed by the Community for the Arts program through Department of Commerce.
A lot of benefit to Snohomish County for the arts. So thank you. And I guess we're just going back a little bit to the Climate Commitment Act funds. Someone would like to see if you can elaborate a little bit more on the auction process and the funds that were generated from it. And they're asking specifically for the bill again. I don't know, Shelly, maybe that's a specific bill number that you might remember. So I'll just throw that out there and see who wants to take that one.
Yeah, the Climate Commitment Act was passed in the 2021 session. And so I don't remember the bill number off the top of my head. But the reason that it's probably more on people's radar right now is because it just took effect January 1 of 2023. This is not a policy that the legislature adopted this year. It was adopted 2 years ago and had time for Department of Ecology to put together the rules and guidelines and all of that. So hopefully that answered the question, but I'll turn it over to Rep. Steele to answer the question about the auction.
Yeah, great question. I'm actually not very familiar with the auction process. I know that the state administers it and participates in it, and then those revenues are driven through the Office of Financial Management, the governor's office, and then handed out to the legislature for spending. But in terms of how the actual auction works, I'm not really familiar, but I'd be happy to dig in and find out. Again, this is all a very new process, and we've only held one auction that took place in the middle of February. So happy to dig in and find out more and send that information to you once I have it.
Thank you, Representative Steele. We can also share a little bit of information as well, I think, on the auction process and how those funds are working. The Blake decision, as you mentioned, obviously a lot of interest to people and across Snohomish County. You're familiar with the Mayor's Coalition. So someone here is asking if you could perhaps get into a little bit more of the sticking points.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you can go into it.
Yeah, there's still some finer negotiating that's going on. We have, and actually both caucuses in the House did publish op-eds in the Seattle Times that I would encourage you to go take a look at. The lead negotiators for both the House Democrats and the House Republicans did publish that op-ed, did publish op-eds in the Seattle Times at the request of the Seattle Times, interestingly enough. And so those lay out pretty good descriptions of where the differences lie. But I'll tell you the major sticking point really is this idea of whether or not possession of these drugs are going to be misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor, keeping in mind we started at a felony. So that's really where the hangup is, gross misdemeanor versus misdemeanor, and what law enforcement is telling us, in terms of how they want to see this bill work. We have all of the major law enforcement organizations are telling us they need at least a gross misdemeanor in order to enforce something. And I would argue that most communities would like that as well, because there's at least some ability to get those folks. It sort of mimics the therapeutic courts and the drug courts. If you get it to a gross misdemeanor in terms of timeline and not in time in therapy or jail, and so there's an alignment there. So that's I think what we're pushing for at the very least. There may be some additional work that's done around whether it's 364 days or it's 180 days that's associated with that gross misdemeanor. We could work through some of that, but that's the major sticking point for the caucuses and 3 of the 4, by the way. 3 of the 4 caucuses, so the Senate Republicans, the House Republicans, and the Senate Democrats are all in alignment on this bill. It is the House Democrats that continue to kind of hold up the process. And so, when you have a bipartisan 3 of the 4 caucuses saying we can fix this and do this, it can kind of show you where the hangup is and what kind of work needs to be done in order to get it across the line. Keeping in mind that the majority caucus in the House is the largest caucus of the 4. So there is work that has to be done amongst all of those folks in that caucus.
Okay, thank you. We have another question related to the Marysville continuation program. That's for students to get better access to college programs or trades. I think this might be referring to the RAP program. So maybe this is a question for you, Shelly. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Marysville Regional Apprenticeship Pathways Program is focused specifically on building and construction trades.
I actually had a chance to visit that program in Marysville. It was fascinating, and I was really proud of the work that was being done there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a state's opportunity to continue to look at that model and see how we might create that, look at that model and see how we might mimic that model across Washington state. It's a very successful model, and I'm really excited to see what I can do on the education committee to see how we might advance that program and again, utilize it in other communities, because it was fascinating to hear those kids talk about their experiences. It was fascinating to see how much work they were able to accomplish before leaving high school and to be set on a pathway of success for post-graduation. That was just phenomenal. So I hope that the state will continue to make investments like that, both in policy and in financial ways to, again, bring this opportunity to more students across Washington, because those kids are going to come out with successful careers, family wage earnings, and opportunities for work right away. So I think that's really impressive.
And workforce development is obviously a top issue for businesses, for communities, for everyone across the board. So I think it's been wonderful to see a lot of investments in workforce development coming out of session. We just have one last question here, maybe related to the new gun safety measures and how are those being perceived across districts and communities from your perspective, Representative Steele?
Yeah, good question. We haven't really seen the policy roll out yet, right? I mean, it has not taken effect. So I don't necessarily know in pragmatic and like logistical ways how that's going to roll out and be received by constituents in the 12th district. I'll just tell you, when those bills were being debated, I had thousands and thousands and thousands of emails in opposition to that throughout the 12th district. And so it was very interesting and even in committee. So we heard a couple of those bills, interestingly enough, came through appropriations. And we had thousands of people signed in opposed, with hundreds of people signed in as pro. So and those are folks from all over the state, not just the 12th district. So we shall see. We shall see how it's received, and once those policies are in place, how folks plan to adhere to them.
Okay, thank you. One last question here on Highway 2, which you sound very familiar with from your travels. And there is funding, from what I understand, in the for the U.S. Trestle too, but specifically this question is just alluding to, can you talk a little bit more about what's in the transportation budget to alleviate the congestion and the traffic through Monroe, Sultan, through to Stevens Pass in Eastern Washington, which is a a top priority for many in this community.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the advocacy that members of this organization have spent time in Olympia doing. And I will just say that both of my seatmates, Representative Gaynor and Senator Hawkins, serve on the respective transportation committee in the House and in the Senate. That is not a committee that I serve on, and I tend to leave those discussions to them because I trust their work. But I will just say that I am very familiar with some roundabout work that we will be doing along Highway 2 in order to alleviate some congestion. We are going to continue to push for any opportunity that we can see in future transportation budgets that would create opportunity for congestion alleviation on Highway 2. The challenge is and we actually, Representative Gaynor and I spent 2 full days driving over over Highway 2 and stopping and pulling off to the side and taking a look at opportunities for even widening. That's a very challenging highway. It's obviously because we have water and rock and things on both sides of the highway. So just taking a look pragmatically at what we could do was a very interesting couple of days as we again pulled off at different mileposts and looked at opportunities and thought, if we remove this rock or blew this hillside apart, what could we do? So we're continuing to look at that and get familiar with that. And obviously folks on this call have a lot of experience with it and are probably way more knowledgeable than Representative Gaynor and I, but we welcome the conversation and want to be actively involved in it. And if there are observations or thoughts you have, please don't hesitate to send them our way.
Okay. Thank you. So Representative Steele, on a lighter note, what was the funnest part of session for you? Or was there a fun part?
Yes, no, there absolutely is. I mean, it's an honor to serve in the legislature. I tell folks it's like getting a master's degree in everything, and the ability to have a question and have a litany of staff who are incredibly knowledgeable in whatever subject area you have a question on, appear at your door at any moment the question is asked and give you information is incredible. The access to information, the access to knowledge is something that for folks who've not served in the legislature, it's just fascinating. But I think for me, the thing that I enjoy most is writing the capital budget. And when I was elected deputy leader, one of the things that was sort of contingent on me taking that responsibility on was allowing me to stay in the room to write that capital budget, because I'm so passionate about, as I said, the economic development opportunities that come through that budget, the ability to make huge differences in both small and large communities. It's just, again, an honor of a lifetime, and to be able to go out and visit communities across Washington and to know that these sometimes very small investments make huge deal, is a huge deal to these communities and game changers in many ways. And so I take that very, very seriously, and I'm very honored to be able to look across Washington and be able to make, again, those differences in communities of all sizes.
Okay, thank you, Rep. Steele. And you perhaps alluded to this a little bit, which ties into my next question. Now that you're Deputy Minority House Leader, what are your plans and your vision for the caucus? And what are the things that you're thinking about into the future and your vision for the upcoming legislature and the year ahead?
Thank you for that question. I would just tell you that my vision for our caucus is that we will focus on the issues that matter on Main Street. That's something that I've always said in almost every one of my campaigns, is we need to be working with people who, and solving problems for folks who are dealing with the everyday issues. So often we hear about these fringe issues that most folks don't care about or aren't affected by. And I would say that if you're paying attention to the communities that you serve, and you're helping the people that live in those communities, you're going to be making a difference, and people are going to be receptive to that. And again, as someone who walks up and down Main Street on a weekly, sometimes daily basis here in my own communities, I know people are doing really good work and making huge differences in the work that they are doing. And if we as a state can help them in those efforts and again, making sure that families have living wage jobs, are able to stay in the communities they love, are helped, by their representatives in government, that's what I think we should be focused on. And I often tell folks, by the time someone reaches my office with some sort of issue or problem, they've exhausted every other opportunity, or they've turned over every other rock. And so they are expecting their representative to make a difference in their lives. And I take that role very seriously, and I want all of my caucus members to do the same. And again, just being pragmatic in our approach to policy, solving problems that everyday folks are facing, and trying to make a difference for all of Washington in meaningful and pragmatic ways is, I think, the path forward for our caucus, and making sure that folks feel safe in their homes, safe in their communities, and that every person, regardless of party or any other status, feels like their government is working for them and feels like we're listening to their needs and trying to at least address them in some pragmatic way.
Thank you, Representative Steele. I could feel the passion coming through in your remarks there, and thank you again for your commitment to advancing issues in Olympia. We're sort of nearing the end of our time on the coffee chat, so I want to give you both a chance to just make some concluding remarks before we wrap things up. I don't see any other questions coming in from our audience here, but if there are, feel free to just pop them in right now before we hand it over to Rep. Steele for some final comments and thoughts, and then we'll turn it over to you as well, Shelly, for any wrap-up remarks. So I don't see anything else, so over to you, Rep. Steele, and thank you for being with us again.
Well, thank you so much for having me this morning. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Again, this is probably one of those groups that really resonates with my work. And I just know how important the work you do is to the communities you represent and the organizations you represent. And I will just tell you that my door is always open. I pride myself on listening to every side of an issue. And I want folks to feel like you can pick up the phone, send me an email, or respond to policy work that we're doing in Olympia at any time. And I will make every effort to get back to you and to respond to your concerns or questions. And again, it's just an honor to serve in the legislature. I look forward to getting to know more of you, and look forward to being very active in Snohomish County. You will see both Representative Gaynor and I on a regular basis across Highway 2. We'll be making stops in all of your communities, and it's just, again, an honor to serve all of the folks of Washington and the new parts of this district. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Steele. You might have 70+ invites to coffee soon. Shelly, over to you. I know we didn't get into a chance to get it deeper into some of the investments or the issues, but just over to you to do some wrap-up remarks, and if there's anything else that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thank you. I think the last thing that I want to mention is just recognition of the Rep. Steele said that, you know, it's his privilege and honor to serve in the legislature. And I know many legislators feel that way. It's also a sacrifice. They spend 105 consecutive days working to pass policies and make investments to make our state function well. And maybe they do get some weekends to go home and spend time with family. I'm sure that's always welcome, but they really are very dedicated to serving our state, and by and large are working together in a bipartisan nature. Of course, you read in the news the bills that are more controversial because, you know, that's what people want to read, but the majority of the work that they do is done across the aisle, and that's, I think that's really representative of the way that Washington has functioned, at least in the time that I have been participating in state government. So with that, I just wanted to offer that word of hope and encouragement that your state government is doing good work. It may feel discouraging at times if you read things in the news, but I think, as Rep. Steele mentioned today, Washington State is doing good work, and you have good leaders representing your community.
Thank you for that, Shelly. Wholeheartedly agree with that, and those remarks on the dedication and the sacrifices that it takes to serve in public service. I just wanted to remind the group of, of a couple of things that are coming up. In terms of our legislative issues, we will be having a public officials reception on June 8th. So if you're part of the EASC community, you have perhaps seen that starting to be advertised. It'll be another opportunity to connect with others in our community, and hear their other representatives and senators in our community, and to hear their perspectives on the issues facing Snohomish County, and also to network with our business and government and civic leaders. And that again is on June 8th from 4 to 7 p.m. As you know, for our coffee chats, we host these every 2 weeks. So the next one will be on May 23rd. It will be a housing focused coffee chat. We did have one a couple of weeks ago where we talked about housing affordability and tackling the issues on that front. This particular coffee chat is a follow-up on some of the outcomes that happened at during the legislative session, some of the bills and the fundings and the issues that were tackled and things that were accomplished in Olympia on a deeper level, and how this matters to our community and to the business community going forward. So appreciate all of you joining us for that coffee chat. And as always, please feel free to join and ask your questions. So we're ending a few minutes early today, but I just wanted to thank everyone for being here and for posing your questions. If you can grab your coffee mugs, do a cheers collectively, and pop into the chat and say thank you to Representative Steele and Shelly Helder. Thank you for being with us this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.